What up, reader fam? Today I'm bringing you another video in my Books I've Read Recently series, the series on my channel where I talk about some books that I've read recently that I don't have that much to say about. I've got 4 books to talk about today, so without further ado, let's get started. The first book that I'm going to be talking about today is the Booksplosion Book of the Month for the month of January, and we worked with Source Books, and that book is Before I Let Go by Marieke Nijkamp. This story follows this girl named Corey who grew up in this really small town in Alaska, and then one day her and her family pack up their stuff and they move away. The move is really hard on Corey because she is leaving behind one of her best friends. Corey decides that she's going to go back to her small town that she grew up in to visit her old friend, but days before she leaves for her trip, she finds out that her best friend is dead. The death is ruled out as a suicide, but Corey thinks there's something suspicious going on with her death, so she takes it upon herself to investigate it. There is a trigger warning for suicide and depression for this book, so be aware of that before picking this book up. I have a rather difficult relationship with this book because there were things that I really enjoyed about it, but there were also things that I wasn't a huge fan of. On the one hand, this book was super engaging. I could not put it down. I read this book in 3 sittings, which is not something that I do very often. So this book definitely had me hooked. It usually takes me at least a week to finish a book, sometimes even longer than that. But with this one, I was determined to figure out what was going on in this creepy small town. And I was dying to know the truth behind the best friend's death. It was also a very well written book when it came to the style of writing. I really liked this author's writing style. There were so many captivating and beautiful lines throughout this book. And I think that the author did a fantastic job of capturing what it's like to lose a loved one. Another great thing that this book brought into play is that we have 2 characters who identify as pansexual and asexual, and that was really nice because we don't often see that kind of representation in books. We're definitely seeing it more now, but it's been a long time coming. So those are all the things that I thought were great and that worked really well for this book, but on the other hand, I did have some issues. I kind of found this book to be a little anticlimactic. I was just expecting so much more from the ending. Mind you, there was a scene in the end that had my heart racing, but I was just expecting a little bit more from the ending. I also kind of just wish that this story would have been more well-rounded. I get that this book deals with a very difficult topic, but I think there's a way to find balance in discussing those difficult things. But I felt like throughout this book, it just had this super heavy feeling the whole way through. There was no like little light moments throughout it. In the end, I ended up giving this book a solid 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up here, I read Wonderstruck by Selznick. This book follows 2 different stories. The first story that we follow is Ben's story. He is on the journey of figuring out who his father is because he has no idea who his father is. And then we follow the life of Rose and her fascination with this famous actress. Both stories are told in different formats and are set 50 years apart. Ben's story is told through text and Rose's story is told through illustrations. Excuse me, I mean stunning illustrations. I avoided reading this book for the longest time because I knew that when I read this book, I would be out of new Selznick books to read, and that day has finally arrived and I'm pretty sad about it, I'm not gonna lie. But I gotta say that this book took the slot for my favorite Selznick book because I loved it that much. And that's a really hard thing for me to say and a hard thing for me to accept because I love the invention of Hugo Cabret by Selznick, but this book came in like a wrecking ball, ba-boom, and made an even bigger impression on me. I am really hyping up this book and I need to settle down a little bit. The way in which the stories collided and connected made my heart explode with happiness, but also with a little bit of sorrow too. The book kind of follows this message of how you can be searching for something specific, and in doing so you might not find what you're looking for, but you might find something that's unexpected and wonderful. I love how even though this book has no magical aspect to it, it still feels so magical. There's just something so magical in the tone of Selznick's writing. While even though there's no fantasy element in this story, it just still feels so magical. This book also features deaf characters, and I honestly don't think I've ever read a book where there were characters who were deaf. So that was a really nice perspective to read from. I'm not sure how accurate the deaf representation is in this book because I'm not deaf, so I don't know if it's depicted well, but I still really enjoyed seeing that aspect in this story. I guess I should critique something because even though I love this, not every book is perfect. I guess the one little critique that I have is that Rose's story didn't feel like it was complete. I think I just wanted a little bit more closure with things that had happened to her growing up. But overall, I ended up giving this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it, I loved it, I loved it. Next up, I read Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie by Sonnenblick. I don't know why I'm speaking like this, but I am. I'll stop now. This story follows the life of Steven, whose life completely changes when his younger brother is diagnosed with cancer. He goes from having a pretty normal life to dealing with all the responsibilities that comes with being an older brother in this situation. I have a kind of funny history with this book because this is the first book in a duology, and I actually actually read the second book before I read this book. It was interesting because the little brother who has cancer in this book is the main character in the sequel, and the little brother is a lot younger in this book than he is in the sequel, so it was just really interesting to see how different he was. Unfortunately, I didn't like this one as much as I liked the sequel. Maybe if I would have read this book before I read the sequel, my opinion would be different, but this one just didn't impact me as much as the second one did. I really struggled liking the main character, and I can deal with unlikable characters, but for some reason it was just really hard for me to like him in this book. I kept trying to remind myself that he is a teenager in a rather difficult situation, but there were so many times where I was just like, you are selfish, you are annoying, get it together. But at the same time, he does develop as a character and he does grow, and by the end of the book, I did end up liking his character. There were also just some cringy lines throughout this book. There was one that I can think of right now that just like almost had me wanting to throw this book, and I didn't write it down, so I don't know it word for word, but basically our main character is talking to a cancer patient that's his same age, and it's a girl, and she's bald because of the treatment that she's going through, and our main character says something like how he hopes someday she'll grow her hair back so she can be beautiful again. I was just like, excuse me? If I were the editor on this book, I would have been like, delete, delete, delete. I did really like the family aspect of this story. I like how it showed the difficulties they were facing and how they didn't just have it magically all together by the end of the book, that they were still working through things. I ended up giving this book a 3 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I have to talk about today is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. This is a book that is written in verse, and we follow the story of a boy who is on his way to get revenge on the person who murdered his brother. But when he steps onto the elevator of the apartment building of the murderer, he's greeted by all these people in his life who have had their lives taken. This is by far the best book I've ever read written in verse. I have a pretty complicated relationship with books written in verse. I tend to feel they don't go deep enough, and it's hard to like really execute a story well in this format. I've never read one that's completely blown me away, but this one completely blew me away. This one went in the direction that I was hoping it would go in. It really delves deep into every character that's introduced, and they each feel really well-rounded, which I think is something that can be really difficult to do in this format. But Jason Reynolds nailed it. The story overall was raw, emotional, and heartbreaking, and it was just overall a super engaging story from start to finish. But to give this book a little critique, even though I loved it, I will say that I was a little bit confused by the ending, and I kind of wish we would have had a little bit more closure. But overall, I still love this book, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, giving it what it deserves. So those are some of the books that I have read recently. You guys should let me know down below in the comments if you have read any of the books that I mentioned and what you thought about them. Also, let me know down below some books that you've read recently. Let me know a book that you loved or a book that let you down. Let me know all your thoughts down below in the comments. If you like this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up. I post videos frequently on this channel, so if you want to see more videos from me, be sure to go and hit subscribe or go and click the little bell icon and you'll be notified every time I post new videos. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you soon with a new video. Bye, choo!